Banker?
Association
you
president.
got a banker somewhere?
Gordon Fellows is on, so maybe we could speed up that coupon and get her done.
I don't know.
Morning, Gordon. How are you, sir? It's good to have you.
Good morning, Paul. Good to be with you. Always good to be in the Trustmark studios.
You got it, my man. Listen, there are so many things going on, and I want to touch base on two things. First of all, the Mississippi Bankers Association come out in support of the flag, which we haven't heard a lot about this. They have no idea what's going to happen. The medical marijuana's kind of taken this off the table a little bit, but it's a beautiful flag. It's probably, with 99% of the people, not the one that they wanted because they all had their individual one. But I think we've coalesced behind this one. It looks good. It looks even better flying on a flagpole outside the state of Mississippi, and I'm looking forward to the beginning of the year, state agencies, universities, everybody getting on board with one flag. And your thoughts on this?
Well, Paul, you're exactly right. It's funny. Sometimes when something's drawn on a piece of paper, it looks better in person. And I'm count me as one of the people who didn't vote for this flag in the straw poll.
Mm-hmm.
I voted for a different one. But when I saw it as a textile, as a piece of cloth made up, hanging on the pole on State Street in front of the old Capitol, I thought, no, there's a flag we can all get behind. It really does look compelling and a little bit. And it looks special to me. So yeah, it's time. The Bankers Association thinks it's time for us to all get together, join as one behind this new flag. Certainly, the "In God We Trust" message is something that we as a people in Mississippi can get behind. The magnolia is a classic symbol of our state. It's represented our state for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And the style and design of this flag, I think, is a great brand. I mean, I look forward to putting it on a hat and wearing it on a T-shirt. I think it's going to be great. So a lot of banks are flying it. If you hadn't seen it, drive by your local bank. We've had a number of banks get an early version of it from Lieutenant Governor Bozeman and run it up their flagpole for people to see. It looks really good as a piece of cloth made up, and certainly. There was an economic impact to the old flag. It hurt us in some ways that are sort of hard to discuss, because you can't get into specifics all the time. But this is a flag that can move our state forward and have a really positive economic impact for sure.
Well, and Gordon, we did this in the midst of a lot of things that were going on across the country that were the opposite of being working together. In the state of Mississippi, I think shocked a lot of people by getting this done. If there was anything that came out of all the negativity and all the chaos, the state of Mississippi put forth something positive and gave birth to that. And I got to tell you, like everybody else, we would like to have this or we would like to have that. And I said it at the beginning, it's like having a committee of 50 million. You're never gonna have a consensus. But after it was over, looking at the color combination of this and those gold stripes, for some reason that just tops it off as very, very classy.
Yeah, I think you're right, and your committee of 50,000 is a good analogy. You can't make everybody happy on these things, but certainly this is a good one, and it's something we ought to adopt as a state and move forward. Let's get past this conversation. Let's move on to other things that we need to address. There's a lot going on here, a lot of good things to be proud of, and let's take the cloud away of the negativity of this and move forward.
Well, I think it's probably a pretty good chance that if we don't pass it this time and wait for the next one, go through this process again, the next one will not fare well. And we may go 15 or 20 years when all of the ill feelings as far as the Confederate flag, how many years, a decade or 2 decades before we would be the state without any identity as a flag. So I'm in agreement with you. Let's get her done, and let's put that one behind us. The big issue is going to be 65, Initiative 65, and I am so confused on this one as far as you guys in the Banking Association. Can you put pot money in your bank or any bank?
Well, we're confused too, Paul, but the short answer is no. There's a federal law called the Bank Secrecy Act, and that law requires banks to track illicit finance, to block illicit finance, to work with law enforcement, to procure and move forward anti-money laundering rules and regulations, right? So, people ask me, what's the banker's position on 65 or 65A? And I tell them the banker's position is that money laundering is bad. We don't like money laundering. And unfortunately, in these 33 other states that have passed some form of marijuana usage, whether it's recreational or medicinal, until Congress changes the federal rules around what's constituted as money laundering, state laws that legalize pot use in any form conflict with money laundering laws. And so the short answer to your question is if there's a direct sale of marijuana, the bank can't differentiate between a legal sale of marijuana or an illegal sale of marijuana in any state. So we can't accept marijuana deposits at all from a direct sale. Now, where that gets really complicated is when banks under the Bank Secrecy Act also have a responsibility to know their customers' customers. So you have to work up and down the payment chain. And so if under 65 or 65A, if a pharmacy dispenses marijuana, then the bank can't take the pharmacy's money. If the pharmacy pays a painter to paint the inside of the pharmacy with cash derived from the sale of marijuana, technically the bank can't take the painter's money. If a pharmacy pays a plumber to run plumbing into that building, technically the bank can't take the plumber's money. Now there's some grayer area in the second and third tier vendor piece. It's not as direct as the direct sale of marijuana. But until Congress changes the money laundering law, there are going to be real implications for Mississippi businesses up and down the payment chain. If this thing passes, if 65A passes or 65 passes.
What about the people who are making money on this, when either as the investor themselves, who are putting millions of dollars in it, or the young man or young woman who's working at the counter and they get their money in the paycheck and they put it in the bank?
Well, can they get a paycheck? Because if it's a cash-only business, which is sort of what this happens in states where this is legal, can you get a paycheck or do you get paid in cash?
Well, if you get paid in cash, you couldn't put that cash in the bank if you wanted to bank
right.
it.
That's right.
So
you've got it. Bank. So in a lot of states, the Colorado and Oregon, those states have been the leaders in this, right?
Have they found a way
become a
around
cash-only
this?
economy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Have they found some way around this in those other 33 states?
Not really. I mean, there's some banks that on the secondary and tertiary level will do a minuscule amount of deposits, but for the direct sale, it's illegal money. And so in Colorado, you see people carrying bags of cash. I mean, I've heard stories of in Colorado, marijuana dealers buying old bank branches so they can have a vault to keep all their cash in, and hiring retired military to protect their cash, owning armored car companies. It becomes a cash-only business or a cryptocurrency business, and I think it's a really bad thing for money to move out of the banking system. If you think about sort of the underlying tiers of how the American society works, right? Every county seat has a courthouse. Every county seat has a local bank, right? And sort of our legal system is one of our underlining guide rails to the way the country works. The banking system is another one, right? And if you pull funds out of the banking system, you run into trouble.
Well, let me ask you this: if I don't have enough money to left over from the island I bought, but I want to go out and get into this business and put some branches up, I can't get a loan from you to do this, to put up a pot shop?
Nope. No, that's illicit.
How is it possible that we are forced to loan $2.5 million to the same people to get this venture underway through the rainy day fund?
There are a lot of people that think they can make money on this. A lot of venture capitalists, right? So they're putting funds into this business, right? And eventually, I think Congress is probably going to fix this. At some point, there's probably going to be some sort of saver for banks to be able to take deposits. But until then, there are going to be real repercussions in Mississippi.
I want to ask you more. Can you hold on for a second? Because there's a couple of other questions on this one, because I know you guys have done some work on it too. What happens to the downtown areas? What happens to the businesses? What do people in the other states that have had some track record with this now, what are they saying about it? Gordon Fellows, President, Mississippi Bankers Association, will be back with us in a second or two. More from that and other sound bites, and then Charlie Winfield. Charlie went to school, law school, at Notre Dame with somebody named Amy Coney Barrett. So his take on this one. As a matter of fact, she attended his wedding. We'll talk to Charlie coming up at 8:05. It's a Monday from the Trustmark Studios. COVID cases, 1,212. That's and ironically, President of the Mississippi Bankers Association, Gordon Fellows, we're talking, and I've learned some things here, that you got the cash. And one of the things that is amazing to me about this, Gordon, is that it has nothing to do with the Mississippi Department of Health, but they could be the biggest, most powerful, richest, most influential agency ever created in any state. And I don't think they want to be that, because there are many questions. When I ask you a question, you said, well, I don't know. There are many things that we don't know about this, and I think in 65, they have a deadline that they have to get this thing done by, I think, the fall of the year. You got to be able to go buy marijuana.
Yeah, well, Paul, let me go back to something you asked right before the break. You asked if a bank could make a loan on this. Let me just add a little context to that. Think about a commercial strip center. Banks finance those all the time, right? So let's say a bank makes a loan to a developer that's building up a strip mall. The realtor goes about the process of locking in tenants for that strip mall. The building begins, it's underway. The first drawing has been made on the construction loan. And then the realtor signs up a medicinal pot dealer. Okay, well, now the bank's got to make a decision. Can it continue to finance that development? Or are they going to tell the landlord they've got to find a new tenant because they know that they're going to get paid back with direct proceeds from the sale of the pot shop, right? So not only is it about a loan to the business that's distributing, it's about loans to all the businesses that tie into that business. That's where it gets really confusing and complicated.
What happens if the deal is done? Later on, they add a pot shop. You pull the loan, introduce lawyer number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere down the line, and that's one of the reasons that there are a lot of trial lawyers who are looking at this as a payday.
Could be really complicated, for sure. So, and like I said, this is weird. If you think about your high school civics class, your high school government class, you remember there's this concept of federalism, right? Where does state law and federal law interact with each other? And we as a country, we sort of tested that and defined that over a really broad spectrum. We haven't yet in this space. And so it's this weird dynamic between state and federal law that makes it really, really difficult to work through.
In Mississippi, we have a great relationship between bankers, hometown banks. They are the important part of any small hometown, and certainly up in the Delta area and other agricultural regions of our state. If a farmer wants to finance something through the bank, and he or she is growing marijuana, then you run a file there too, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. And if a fertilizer company begins to sell to a farmer, right, then the fertilizer company might have an issue. Right. If the farmer's growing and the fertilizer company sells to the farmer that's growing, the fertilizer company might have an issue.
What about you? And again, introduce a lawyer in all of these scenarios. What about the people who work for you? Because I was looking in Section 2 here. The section exempts patients and caregivers and doctors and treatment centers from criminal prosecution, which means that if something goes wrong, you're screwed one way or the other. But what about your employees, too? Can you mandate that they be not using marijuana?
Yeah, that's really a question for the other side of the other side of the continuum on this. From our perspective, the federal issue is whether or not we can take the deposit or provide financial service to the business. I've talked to folks at the manufacturers about the labor issue, and I think they feel like there's some protection there, but I'm not an expert in that, so I don't know that I can
answer.
But
again, on the employment side, as far as the bank is concerned, can they put into their employment contract with that employee, whether it's a teller or a bank president, that you cannot use medical marijuana?
Yeah, I don't know. That's our focus has been sort of on the whether or not we can provide financial services. We haven't really dug into that side.
Final thoughts here on some of the other things that, and I know that I looked at some of the polling data, and I haven't seen anything new in the last several days, but anywhere from 75 to 81% chance that this thing is going to pass. And we are going to have medical marijuana, so-called medical marijuana, which is all marijuana is marijuana. There's no medical variety of marijuana. It's all marijuana. And the other thing, these are not treatment centers, they're pot shops, and I have no idea who placed the name on them, but it's great marketing calling them a treatment center. You could, if that's the case, then every liquor store is a treatment center as well. But if that passes, there are going to be a lot of things that we cannot control in the hometowns of our state, because this bill, as far as 65 is concerned, mandates that wherever they want to move within 500 feet of schools and I think churches, I'm not sure about the churches, or is it 400 feet, 500 feet, then they can do so. Now, the other part of this is, and we're going to solve this a little bit later on in the week with a couple of interviews, when is this mandated at 65A? I was always under the impression that it had to get underway with the next legislative session, but we'll clarify that a little bit later on. Your final thoughts on this one, Gordon? Yeah,
Paul, I mean, you bring up a good point. There are public health concerns here. There are public safety concerns here. There are municipal and zoning concerns here. All of those, there are a lot of people that have opinions on all that. From our perspective, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk through this, whether it passes as 65, whether it passes as 65A, either way, there are going to be issues that banks have to work through with businesses, and we want to make sure your listeners sort of understand that if somebody is told, well, I can't take your deposits anymore, at least they'll know, we kind of saw this coming. And it's a shame, and it's a complicated thing. And of course, banks want to do everything they can to serve customers, but they can't take unnecessary risk.
Well, and we have no idea what the consequences are or the ramifications long-term happen to be from the agency itself, as far as the Mississippi Department of Health not being able to use some of that money to maybe have another class of highway patrolmen, simply because the amount of wrecks or fatalities on the highways have increased because of this. And it could go on and on and on. There are consequences out there we don't even know yet. But none of that money can be used. If they have to, even in your own hometown, they got to increase your local taxes in your hometown to take care of some of these problems that arise from this, regardless if the Department of Health is sitting there with $15 billion.
Even if the taxes could go to the general fund, I'm not sure that the banks could accept state deposits.
Yeah.
Because it's still illegal money, one way or the other, right?
You bring a unique perspective to this one. And do you think it's going to be solved anytime soon as far as the Congress is concerned?
Well, if you'd asked me in June if I thought Congress would pass another stimulus bill, I'd have said yes. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard to know what Congress is going to do right now. There's a lot of issues up there. The banking industry has been talking with Congress about this issue for 4 or 5 years, and I certainly think there's an understanding of it. Eventually you probably get to a point where there's critical mass of states that have legalized in some way, and Congress will respond to that. But there's a lot sort of pulling on Congress's bandwidth right now, and so who knows when.
Gordon, those same sensitivities or guidelines don't pertain to hemp, do they?
No, because Congress, under the last farm bill, legalized hemp, and then the legislature followed a few years ago. Now, before the legislature enacted it, you started to see CBD oil pop up in Mississippi. Yeah. Technically, that was an illegal product, and so I know of banks that told long-standing deposit relationships with, for instance, with vitamin shops. We can no longer make you a loan. We can no longer take your deposit. Now, that's been corrected, I think, since the legislature acted this year. But for a while, it was a problem.
I do wonder, because there were some people who said that they thought vape shops could possibly get a pot license and then they could combine the two. But if that's the case, the same thing applies. If you have a loan through a bank as a vape shop, then you also are running afoul.
If you're making money off of the sale of marijuana, whether it's legal in the state or not, and it's a money laundering infraction under the Bank Secrecy Act, because it's still a controlled substance under the Federal Controlled Substance Act. So
and the other part of that, go ahead.
No, it will be illicit funds until Congress fixes it.
And understanding the other complication in all of this, Gordon, is that this is not a law that the state legislature in the next session can change. Because if 65 passes, it is in our Constitution, so the legislature, and nobody else can solve this. As a matter of fact, not even the federal government, as far as the statutes put forward in our state Constitution. Gordon's always good, sir. Thank you so very much. You gave us a lot of fodder for thought on this one, and I hope people understand that and where we're going.
It's a lot to think about on a Monday morning, isn't it, Paul?
It sure is. Thank you, man. Appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you.
Gordon Fellows, President, Mississippi Bankers Association. Charlie Winfield's going to join us 8:00.